Welcome to LexTalks Legal Topics Simplified, here to help you understand Indian law better. Today we're diving deep into legal aid and the history of Lok Adalats in India.
It's a fascinating area.
Yeah, really. We're going to be looking at how India is trying to make sure everyone has a chance at justice, not just a select few.
Right. Not just those who can afford it.
Exactly. Now, you've been doing a lot of research on this. What stood out to you so far?
Well, one thing that really struck me was the sheer scale of Lok Adalats. We're talking millions of cases settled.
Millions.
Millions. Think of the potential years of backlog saved for the court system. That's a powerful story of evolution and innovation.
Wow. Okay, so before we get into Lok Adalats themselves, let's lay some groundwork. What exactly is legal aid? I mean, for someone who's never even heard the term before.
Sure. Legal aid basically means ensuring that everybody, regardless of how much money they have, can access legal representation and seek justice.
So it's about leveling the playing field.
Uh-huh.
Because as we all know, legal processes can be expensive and complicated.
Absolutely. It's about making sure that justice isn't something that only the wealthy can afford.
That's so important. Okay,
Yeah.
so is this just like a nice idea? Or is it something that's actually enshrined in Indian law?
It's definitely much more than just a good intention. In India, the right to legal aid is a fundamental right. It's actually part of the Constitution.
Oh, wow. That's really powerful.
It is. It really highlights just how seriously India takes this concept. But it's interesting because it wasn't always this way.
Right. That's what's so fascinating to me. From what we've read, it seems like legal aid in India have gone through quite a journey to get to this point.
You're absolutely right. In the early stages, things were a lot more informal. It might have been community efforts or charitable organizations stepping in to help people.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But I guess as India's legal system became more complex, that informal approach wasn't enough anymore.
Exactly. And the need for a more structured system became really obvious. So there were several key milestones along the way. But perhaps the most significant development was the Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987. 1987.
Yeah. And this act was basically the game changer. It created this whole framework for providing legal services to people who couldn't afford them.
So did it set up specific organizations or something?
It did. It established this whole network of legal service institutions at different levels, like the national, state, and district levels. So this ensured a more organized and consistent approach to legal aid across the entire country, which was a huge step forward.
So that's how legal aid became a concrete system instead of just a well-intentioned concept.
Yeah.
But it seems like around the same time, another really unique element emerged. Lok Adalats, the people's courts.
Exactly. And the development of Lok Adalats really showcases just how committed India is to accessible justice,
Right.
because they offer this alternative to traditional courts that's less formal and a lot more approachable.
Less formal. How so?
Well, for one thing, you don't need a lawyer to represent you in a Lok Adalat. So it encourages this direct interaction between the parties and the judge. Interesting. I guess that could make people feel a little less intimidated by the whole legal process.
Right. Exactly. And it can help to cut through a lot of the complex legal jargon that can be really confusing for people, especially if they're not familiar with the legal system.
Right. So Lok Adalats try to make things a bit simpler. And I read that there are no court fees involved.
That's right. They really strive to make the whole process as accessible as possible. And they really prioritize resolving disputes in a way that's amicable and coming up with solutions that work for everyone.
That makes a lot of sense.
Oh.
But what happens if someone doesn't agree with the Lok Adalats decision? Do they have a right to appeal?
That's where it gets really interesting. With Lok Adalats, the decisions are actually final and binding. So there's no option to appeal.
Wow. That's pretty different from a regular court, isn't it? Where you could take your case to a higher court if you weren't happy with the outcome.
It is, and it's definitely a system that relies a lot on the parties' willingness to compromise and the perceived fairness of the whole process.
Right. So if one side feels like they really got a raw deal, there's no going back.
Well, there are safeguards in place, remember. The judge who presides over the Lok Adalat, they're still a judicial officer, so they're bound by the principles of law and fairness.
So although there's no formal appeals process, the judge still plays a key role in making sure the outcome is just.
Absolutely. And you have to keep in mind, the whole nature of Lok Adalats, it really encourages people to actively participate in the process and work together towards a solution that everyone can live with.
Makes sense. It's almost like knowing that the decision is final. It motivates people to try harder to find common ground. because they know there won't be a second chance.
Exactly. Now, these Lok Adalats, they didn't just appear out of thin air, did they?
That's what I'm curious about. How did this whole concept come about?
Well, they actually have a pretty fascinating history. They kind of evolved from these more informal, experimental beginnings, you could say.
Oh, really? Like what?
You see the legal system recognized early on that for a lot of disputes, particularly those within communities or families, a less adversarial approach might actually be more effective.
Makes sense. So instead of fighting it out in a courtroom, trying to find a solution that everyone could agree on.
That's the idea. So these early Lok Adalats, they were often more like community-led initiatives, just testing the waters of this more informal method of resolving disputes.
Yeah, and as we saw with legal aid, the Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987 was a real turning point for Lok Adalats, too. It gave them this,
Yeah.
legal framework, legitimacy, structure, and that really helped to boost their acceptance and use all across the country.
So by the late 80s, both legal aid and Lok Adalats were really becoming key parts of the Indian legal landscape.
Exactly. But the story doesn't end there, because in 2002, there was a significant amendment to the Legal Services Authorities Act.
Oh.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think, especially when you start to consider, the complexities of public utility services in India, public utility services. So we're talking electricity, water supply, telecommunications, right? Essential services.
Exactly. And the thing is, disputes related to these services, they often affect huge numbers of people.
Right. If there's a problem with the electricity supply, a whole village could be left in the dark.
Exactly. And these issues can get really complicated really fast. You have to think about the technical aspects, the regulations, all the different stakeholders involved. And before this 2002 amendment, there really wasn't a dedicated forum to resolve these kinds of disputes quickly and fairly.
So it sounds like there was kind of a gap in the system.
Yeah, you could say that. And the 2002 amendment was designed to address that gap. So they created permanent Lok Adalats specifically to handle these disputes related to public utility services.
That's really smart. It recognizes that these essential services are so vital that you need a specialized system to deal with them and make sure things don't get disrupted.
Right. And that's just one example of how Lok Adalats are being used to meet very specific needs within the Indian legal system.
It seems like they offer a lot of advantages over traditional courts. We've talked about the speed and the affordability and the informality, but what about the bigger picture? Have they really made a difference?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. Look, Adalats have settled millions of cases across India, cases that could have dragged on for years in the regular court system.
Millions. That's incredible.
It is. But it's not just about the numbers. You have to think about the impact on people's lives. Faster resolutions mean less stress, fewer expenses.
Yeah.
People can move on with their lives.
Yeah, it's like this huge weight lifted off their shoulders. They don't have to keep fighting and spending money and energy on these court battles that seem to go on forever.
Exactly. But of course, no system is perfect. There have definitely been challenges along the way.
What kind of challenges?
Well, one of the biggest challenges has been ensuring consistency, making sure that all Adalats across the country are operating at the same level of quality and effectiveness. Because remember, they're operating at all these different levels from village to district to state.
All right, so you've got Lok Adalats in rural areas and in big cities. It must be difficult to ensure that the quality of justice is the same everywhere.
Absolutely. Another challenge has been awareness. Even though Lok Adalats have become more popular over the years, a lot of people, especially in rural areas, might not even know about them or how to access them.
Right. It's one thing to have a great system in place, but if people don't know about it, then it's not going to be very effective.
Exactly. And then there's the whole question of enforcement.
Enforcement, what do you mean?
Well, Lok Adalat decisions are binding, but making sure that everyone actually complies with those decisions, especially if one party is being a bit reluctant, that can be a challenge sometimes.
It makes sense. Reaching an agreement is one thing, but making sure that everyone sticks to it, that's another thing altogether.
It is. And that's why it's so important to build trust in the system, to make sure that people believe that the Lok Adalat process is fair, because if they don't trust the system, then they're less likely to accept its decisions.
So it sounds like building confidence in the system is just as important as the legal framework itself.
It really is, because without that trust, the whole thing kind of falls apart.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what about the future? Where do you see Lok Adalats going from here?
Well, this is where it gets really exciting, because technology is poised to play a huge role in the future of Lok Adalats. I mean, Imagine online platforms where people can file their disputes, virtual hearings, AI-powered tools that help with mediation and drafting settlements.
Wow. So people could participate in Lok Adalats from their own homes, no matter where they are in the country.
Exactly. It could completely revolutionize access to justice, especially for people in remote areas or people with disabilities who might have difficulty traveling to a physical location.
That's amazing. And I guess having all the records and case information online would make the whole process a lot more transparent and user-friendly.
Exactly. But of course, with any new technology, there are always potential risks.
What kind of risks?
Well, for one thing, there's the digital divide. You have to make sure that everyone has equal access to this technology and the skills they need to use it effectively.
Right. We don't want technology to create new barriers to justice instead of breaking them down.
Exactly. And data security and privacy are absolutely crucial in any legal setting. We have to protect people's sensitive information.
That's a really good point. What about the human element in all this? With all this talk of AI and automation, I wonder if Lok Adalats risk losing that personal touch, that focus on compromise and understanding.
That's a really important point, and it's something we need to be mindful of, because technology should be a tool that enhances the human element of Lok Adalats, not something that replaces it altogether.
So it's about finding that balance,
Right.
harnessing the power of technology, but without losing sight of those core values, the accessibility, the fairness, the human-centric approach to resolution.
You've hit the nail on the head. Striking that balance is going to be absolutely crucial as Lok Adalats continue to evolve.
It's fascinating to see how this traditional system is adapting and evolving to meet the needs of a changing world.
It really is. It shows how committed India is to finding new and innovative ways to make sure that everyone has access to justice.
I have to say, this has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I'm starting to really grasp the complexities of Lok Adalats and their role in the Indian legal system.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a testament to India's ongoing pursuit of justice accessibility and a more equitable society for all.
Before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, is there one key takeaway that you'd like our listeners to think about?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Access to justice isn't a static thing. It's a process, a journey. It's constantly evolving. And legal aid and Lok Adalats are really powerful examples of that evolution. They demonstrate a deep commitment to making sure that justice is within reach for everyone, no matter their circumstances.
That's a really powerful point. And it's something that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into this topic. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll continue our deep dive into legal aid and Lok Adalats in India. We'll be looking at the kinds of cases they handle, the different people involved, and their overall impact on the Indian legal landscape. Welcome back to LexTalks. We've spent the last 2 parts of our deep dive really getting into the history and impact of legal aid and Lok Adalats, but I'm really curious to see how they actually work, on the ground.
Right question. We've covered the what and the why, so now let's dig into the how.
Perfect. So let's start with legal aid. What kind of cases do they usually cover? Is it pretty much everything?
Well, it's not just about representing someone in court. Legal aid covers a whole range of services. It could be giving legal advice, helping someone draft a document, or even guiding them toward other ways to resolve their disputes, like using a Lok Adalat.
So it's kind of a holistic approach.
Yeah.
Like supporting people throughout the entire process, not just when they end up in front of a judge.
Exactly. The idea is to provide help whenever and wherever it's needed most.
That makes sense. But not everyone qualifies for legal aid, right? How do they decide who's eligible?
Yeah, so eligibility for legal aid is mainly based on financial need. Each state has its own income thresholds that determine who can access those services.
So if someone can't afford to hire a lawyer, they can apply for legal aid, and if they meet the criteria, they can get the help they need.
Exactly. It's all about removing those financial barriers so that everyone has a fair shot at justice.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, switching gears to Lok Adalats for a second. I'm curious about the kinds of cases that they're best suited for, because it seems like they wouldn't be the right solution for every legal issue.
You're absolutely right. Look, Adalats are particularly good at dealing with cases that involve money or property, family matters like divorce or maintenance, and what are called compoundable criminal offenses.
Compoundable criminal offenses, what does that mean?
So those are basically less serious criminal offenses where the law allows the parties to settle things amongst themselves. So let's say someone damages your property. If you both agree on compensation, you could settle that at Lok Adalat instead of having to go through a full trial.
Oh, so it's like finding a practical solution without getting bogged down in all the complicated court procedures.
Exactly. But it's important to remember Lok Adalats aren't a replacement for formal courts. For more serious criminal offenses or cases that involve really complex legal issues that require a deeper dive, those are better handled in the traditional court system.
Right. Makes sense. So we've talked a lot about the judge's role in Lok Adalats, but who else is involved? Who helps make these people's courts actually work?
Well, legal services institutions are really important. They're kind of like the backbone of the system. They provide all the support and the infrastructure for these Lok Adalats to function. They organize and conduct the Lok Adalats and make sure everything's running smoothly.
So they're like the organizers,
Yeah.
making sure all the pieces are in place.
Exactly. And they also do a lot of work to raise awareness about Lok Adalats and encourage people to use them.
So they're kind of like a bridge, connecting people with this really valuable resource.
I like that. And it's not just legal professionals either. Lok Adalats often involve social workers, retired judges, and other respected people from the community who can help with the whole mediation process.
So it's not just a cold legal process.
Yeah.
It also has this really strong community element.
Absolutely. And that really adds to the uniqueness of Lok Adalats because you have this blend of legal expertise and community involvement.
This has been such a great deep dive. I feel like I'm really getting a good understanding of how legal aid and Lok Adalats actually work. So to wrap things up, what would you say is their overall impact on the Indian legal system?
I think it's safe to say that they've really strengthened the system. They've increased access, improved efficiency, boosted legal awareness, and most importantly, they've empowered individuals, especially those who might be marginalized, to actually engage with the legal system and seek the justice they deserve.
So it's not just about resolving individual cases. It's about creating a fairer system for everyone.
Exactly. And I think that's a really powerful message to leave our listeners with today. Justice shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right that's accessible to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. And legal aid and Lok Adalats are powerful tools in that ongoing fight for justice.
Well said. This has been a truly enlightening deep dive. Thanks for joining us on LexTalks. We hope you found this episode informative. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more fascinating explorations of the world of Indian law.